The champagne hit James Thomas Sullivan's face before the crowd understood what was happening. Cold liquid splashed across his eyes, his nose, dripping down the cheap fabric of his target suit, while 300 people in the grand ballroom of the Chicago Arts Institute turned to watch. The sound came next. Victoria Ashworth Whitmore's diamond-ringed hand connecting with his cheek in a crack that silenced conversations across the marble floor. Security. Get this filth out before he steals the silverware. Sullivan didn't flinch, didn't raise his hand, didn't speak. He stood near the refreshment table where crystal champagne flutes towered 15 feet high, where oil paintings worth more than most people earned in a lifetime hung on silk-covered walls, where the Metropolitan Children's Cancer Foundation was celebrating another year of charitable giving. The stain spread across his shirt, $89 at Target, the same price he'd paid for the jacket, the pants, the tie. He'd chosen carefully, wanted to see exactly this. The silence lasted 3 seconds, long enough for phones to appear, long enough for Victoria's face to twist from shock at her own violence into something uglier. Satisfaction. How dare you show your face at this event? Sullivan lifted his hand slowly, wiped champagne from his eyes with the back of his wrist. The room held its breath. Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Victoria's laugh cut through the ambient music like breaking glass. I know exactly who you are. You're the janitor from the Riverside Hotel. I've seen you mopping floors in that ridiculous uniform. She wasn't wrong. Sullivan worked 3 nights a week at the Riverside, 11 at night until 7 in the morning, emptying trash cans, scrubbing toilets, mopping the marble floors of the lobby where guests like Victoria stayed in suites that cost more per night than he officially earned in a month. What Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew, was why. Yes, ma'am, I work at the Riverside. Then what in God's name are you doing here? Victoria gestured at the opulent surroundings, at the guests dripping in diamonds and designer labels, at the world she believed belonged to people like her. This is a $10,000 a plate charity dinner, not a soup kitchen. Sullivan reached into his jacket pocket. Victoria flinched backward despite herself. Relax, mother. A young man appeared at Victoria's side, Garrett Whitmore, 33 years old, executive vice president of nothing he'd ever earned. His smirk suggested he'd never been denied anything in his life, never been told no, never faced consequences for cruelty dressed up as humor. What's he going to do? Mop us to death? The laughter that followed was nervous, uncertain. A few guests joined in because Garrett's grandfather owned half of Chicago's medical supply chain and you didn't cross the Whitmores without cost. Sullivan pulled out a simple white envelope, held it up without speaking. Let me see that. Garrett snatched the envelope before Sullivan could offer it, tore it open with the carelessness of someone who'd never been taught to respect other people's property. His smirk flickered as he scanned the contents, invitation, table assignment, confirmation number, then returned, harder than before. This is obviously forged. Mother, look at this pathetic attempt. Victoria examined the invitation with theatrical disdain, holding it between 2 fingers like something contaminated. Anyone can print something on cardstock. The question is, how did you get past security? I walked through the front door. Impossible. Victoria snapped her fingers at a passing security guard, Miles Crawford, 55 years old, 14 years with the foundation, 3 kids in college, mortgage on a small house in Bridgeport. Miles approached with the careful neutrality of a man who'd learned that rich people's moods could change like Chicago weather. Yes, Mrs. Whitmore, this man. Victoria pointed at Sullivan like he was a stain on the Persian carpet. How did he get in here? Miles looked at Sullivan, recognition flickering across his face. They knew each other. Not well, but enough. Sullivan sometimes worked the late shift when Miles pulled overnight security at events. They'd shared coffee once, talked about their kids, about the price of college, about the cost of just living. "Ma'am," he came through the main entrance. He had a valid invitation. "I checked it myself." "Then you're fired." The words dropped like stones into still water. Miles's face went pale beneath his dark skin. "Ma'am, I've worked for this foundation for 14 years. I know a legitimate invitation when I said, you're fired. Collect your things and leave. I'll have HR send your final paycheck." Sullivan stepped forward. "That's not necessary. This man did nothing wrong." Victoria's head swiveled toward him with predatory intensity. "Excuse me? Are you telling me what is and isn't necessary? I'm saying he was doing his job. His job is to keep people like you out." The words hung in the air. People like you. Sullivan felt something shift in his chest. Not anger exactly, though that was there too. Something colder, more calculated. He'd known this moment would come, had dressed for it, had walked into this ballroom prepared to see exactly who these people were when they thought they held all the power. "Don't play stupid." Victoria leaned closer, lowering her voice to a hiss that somehow carried to the growing crowd of onlookers. "You know exactly what I mean. The help, the workers, the little people who clean our toilets and serve our food, and then scurry back to whatever hole they crawled out of." Sullivan's jaw tightened. He forced himself to relax, to breathe, to remember why he was here. Behind Victoria, he could see her daughter, Claire Whitmore, 29, holding up her phone. The screen showed Instagram Live. 5,000 viewers, 10,000, 20,000. The numbers climbed like a fever. "I came to support the charity." This time, Victoria's laugh was genuine, the laugh of someone who'd heard the most ridiculous thing imaginable. "Support the charity? You? With what? Your mop and bucket? Mother, what's happening?" Claire pushed through the crowd, phone still raised, angle perfect for capturing Sullivan's champagne-soaked humiliation. "My followers are losing their minds. This," Victoria announced to the camera, to the 40,000 people now watching, "is what happens when security gets lazy." Some janitor decided he deserved to breathe the same air as actual donors. The comment section exploded. "OMG, what a loser. Why is he just standing there? Call the cops. Check his pockets." Sullivan watched the words scroll past, each one a small revelation about the world, about the people in it, about what they believed and what they valued, and what they thought gave them the right to judge. "You're getting my daughter's dress wet." Victoria's voice hit a new pitch. "That's a $40,000 garment. I apologize for the inconvenience." "Inconvenience?" Victoria's voice could shatter crystal now. "You've ruined my entire evening. I'm the chair of this foundation's board. I've spent 6 months planning this gala, and now I have to deal with some intruder who doesn't know his place." Garrett moved closer to Sullivan, close enough that Sullivan could smell whiskey on his breath, could see the calculation behind his eyes. "You know what I think? I think we should search him, check his pockets, see what he's stolen." "I haven't stolen anything." "That's exactly what a thief would say." Garrett reached for Sullivan's jacket. Sullivan caught his wrist. Not hard, not aggressive, just a firm, unmovable grip that stopped the motion cold. "Please don't touch me." Garrett's eyes widened. He tried to pull free, couldn't. His face flushed red with shock and humiliation and something that might have been fear if he'd ever learned to recognize it. Let go of my son. Sullivan released Garrett's wrist immediately. Garrett stumbled backward, rubbing his arm like he'd been burned, like those 3 seconds of being unable to impose his will on another person had wounded him in ways he didn't have words for. Did you see that? Garrett pointed at Sullivan with his other hand, voice rising. He assaulted me. That's assault. Someone call the police. I didn't assault anyone. I asked you not to touch me. You grabbed me. Mother, he grabbed me. Senator Henry Whitmore emerged from the crowd, 72 years old, silver-haired, distinguished in the way that only old money and older power could manufacture. He walked with a cane that was more affectation than necessity, a visual reminder of authority that had never been questioned, never been challenged, never been threatened. What seems to be the problem, Victoria? This man. Victoria's hand shook as she pointed. This janitor crashed our gala and just assaulted Garrett. The senator studied Sullivan with the cold assessment of a man who'd spent 40 years in politics, learning to categorize people instantly. His gaze traveled from Sullivan's wet hair to his Target suit to his scuffed dress shoes. $12 at a discount store, chosen for the same reason as everything else tonight. I see. Senator Whitmore pulled out his phone, fingers moving with the practiced ease of someone who'd made 1,000 calls like this, who knew exactly which numbers to dial, which favors to call in, which levers to pull. I'll have this handled. Sullivan's phone buzzed in his pocket. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. He ignored it. Young man. The senator's voice carried the weight of absolute authority, the certainty of someone who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. I'm going to give you one chance to walk out of here quietly. If you do, we'll forget this ever happened. If you don't, I'll have you arrested for trespassing, assault, and whatever else my lawyers can make stick. Sullivan met the senator's gaze. Didn't blink. Didn't look away. With respect, Senator, I have every right to be here. I have a valid invitation to this event. Invitations can be forged. This one wasn't. Then how did you afford it? Victoria demanded. $10,000 a plate. That's probably more than you make in 3 months cleaning toilets. Sullivan didn't answer. Let the silence build. Let them fill it with their assumptions, their certainty, their absolute conviction that they knew who he was and what he was worth and what he deserved. That's what I thought. Victoria turned to address the crowd, voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. This man apparently decided that working at a hotel gave him the right to crash our event. Security will be removing him shortly. Claire's live stream had climbed to 150,000 viewers. The comments were vicious. Throw him out. What a pathetic loser. Should have known better than to show up where he doesn't belong. Check him for weapons. Sullivan's phone buzzed again. 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 The frequency was increasing. Every few seconds now, like someone was desperately trying to reach him, like something was happening that required his immediate attention. He let it buzz. Oh, is that your drug dealer? Garrett sneered. Someone wondering why you're not at your corner? Sullivan's voice was quiet when he spoke, but something in it made Garrett take a step back. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. And yet, you've decided I'm a criminal because I work a job you consider beneath you. Because it is beneath me. It's beneath all of us. I see. Sullivan reached up, straightened his wet tie with careful precision. "And what do you do, Garrett? For work?" Garrett's face reddened. "I'm the executive vice president of development at Whitmore Medical Supply." Impressive title. "What do you actually do?" "I develop strategic initiatives for—" "Your mother gave you that job, didn't she? And your grandfather put up the money to start the company. What have you actually built? What have you created? What have you accomplished that wasn't handed to you?" The crowd went silent. Even Claire's live stream comments slowed. 200,000 people waiting to see what would happen next. Victoria stepped forward, hand raised for another slap. "How dare you speak to my son that way?" This time, Sullivan caught her wrist before the blow landed. Gently, firmly, "Mrs. Whitmore, I've allowed you to assault me once tonight. I won't allow it again. Let go of me when you lower your hand." Victoria's eyes bulged. "This is assault. Henry, he's assaulting me." Senator Whitmore moved forward, cane raised like a weapon. "Release my daughter immediately." Sullivan released Victoria's wrist. She stumbled backward into Garrett's arms, cradling her wrist like it was broken, like those 3 seconds of being unable to strike another human being without consequence had damaged her in ways she couldn't comprehend. "He hurt me, Garrett. He hurt me. I barely touched you. That's a lie." Victoria addressed the crowd, tears streaming down her face now, tears that Sullivan recognized as performance, as the weapon of someone who'd learned that vulnerability could be wielded like a knife. "You've all seen what he did. This man broke into our charity event and attacked me. Someone do something." The museum director hurried over, face flushed with panic. "What's happening, Mrs. Whitmore? What's going on? This criminal attacked me. Arrest him. Call the police. Do something." The director looked at Sullivan with obvious discomfort. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I have an invitation." "Yes, well, regardless of that, you've clearly upset our primary donor." "And your primary donor?" Sullivan's eyebrow raised slightly. "Is that what she is?" The Whitmore family has donated over $20 million to this foundation over the past decade. Their support is vital to our mission of helping children with cancer. Sullivan nodded slowly, pieces clicking into place. "I see. And because of that, she can assault guests, humiliate workers, have innocent security guards fired." "Sir, please. I'm trying to avoid involving law enforcement." "No." Victoria pushed forward, mascara streaking her cheeks. "No, I want him arrested. Henry, call the commissioner. I want this man prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Senator Whitmore was already dialing, voice smooth and practiced. "Commissioner Martinez? Henry Whitmore. We have a situation at the Arts Institute. Possible assault, definitely trespassing. I need officers here immediately." Sullivan's phone buzzed again. The frequency was relentless now. Every few seconds, like an alarm he couldn't silence. Like the world outside this ballroom was trying to break through the carefully constructed reality these people had built. Claire moved closer, shoving her phone in Sullivan's face. "Any last words before they drag you off to jail? My followers want to know." Sullivan looked directly into the camera. His face was calm, almost serene. Champagne still glistened in his graying hair. His cheap suit was stained and wrinkled. He looked exactly like what the Whitmores had accused him of being. A nobody who had wandered into the wrong world. "Yes. I have something to say." Claire's eyes lit up. This was content gold, the kind of viral moment that could add another 1,000,000 followers, another 0 to her sponsorship deals. "Go ahead." Tell us why you thought you could crash a party for your betters." Sullivan reached into his jacket pocket again. The security guards tensed. Garrett took a step back. Victoria grabbed the senator's arm, but Sullivan didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a phone, not the cheap model they'd assumed he carried, but something sleek and custom-built, a device that none of them recognized. "Mrs. Whitmore." Sullivan's voice was still quiet, but somehow it carried across the entire silent ballroom. "You asked how I could afford a $10,000 ticket because you stole it or forged it or—" "I didn't buy a ticket." "Ha." Victoria's triumph was immediate. "I knew it. He admits he snuck in. Henry, did you hear that? He admits, I didn't buy a ticket because I donated $35 million to this charity this afternoon." The ballroom went absolutely silent. Not the silence of anticipation, but the silence of a world suddenly reordering itself, of certainty crumbling, of power shifting in ways that no one had seen coming. Victoria laughed, but it was uncertain now, the laugh of someone who sensed the ground shifting beneath her feet. "That's ridiculous. That's insane. The largest donation we've ever received was $12 million, and that was from me. 4 years ago. Anonymously." Claire's live stream exploded. The viewer count shot past 300,000. The comments became incoherent, a wall of confusion and shock and dawning realization. "You're lying." Victoria's voice had gone shrill. "You're a janitor. You mop floors. I've seen you." "Yes, I mop floors at the Riverside Hotel 3 nights a week." Sullivan held up his phone, turning the screen toward Victoria, toward the cameras, toward the 300 people who'd watched this unfold and done nothing. "I also founded Lifeguard AI 6 years ago. It's now the largest healthcare artificial intelligence company in the world." Victoria's face drained of color as she read the screen. Forbes profile, James Thomas Sullivan. Net worth, $2.8 billion. Founder and CEO, Lifeguard AI. Employees, 19,200. Annual revenue, $3.4 billion. That's not... Victoria's voice trailed off. Sullivan swiped to the next screen. "I also own Meridian Capital Partners, which holds a 71% controlling stake in Whitmore Medical Supply's primary raw material provider." Garrett's smirk had vanished completely. "What? Your company can't manufacture a single product without materials from my supply chain." Sullivan swiped again. "I also own significant positions in your family's real estate holdings, your shipping contracts, and your pharmaceutical distribution network." Senator Whitmore lowered his phone slowly, the call to the commissioner forgotten. "That's impossible, is it?" Sullivan turned the screen toward the senator. "Perhaps you'd like to see the records of your campaign contributions over the last 6 election cycles. $14.2 million from various PACs, all of which trace back to holding companies I control." The senator went pale, but those contributions were anonymous, untraceable until now. Claire's live stream had hit 400,000 viewers. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone steady. The comment section had become chaos, disbelief and shock, and the dawning understanding that they were watching something unprecedented unfold in real time. Victoria grasped for her last weapon, her voice, her status, her absolute certainty in her own superiority. Why? Why would a billionaire work as a janitor? Why would you hide? This doesn't make any sense. Sullivan looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket again and pulled out a worn photograph, creased from years of being carried and touched and remembered. A little girl, 7 years old. brown hair, gap-toothed smile, standing next to a woman with the same hair and the same smile, but tired, thin, clearly ill. My wife, Rachel. She died of ovarian cancer 2 years ago. Sullivan's voice cracked slightly. My daughter, Emma. She was 7 when we lost her mother. The ballroom had become a tomb. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the live stream comments had gone quiet. 500,000 people watching something too raw, too real for mockery. Rachel made me promise something before she died. Sullivan's hands trembled as he held the photograph. She said, "James, don't let Emma grow up thinking money makes her better than other people. Don't let her become like the families we used to envy. Make sure she knows that kindness matters more than status, that work has dignity, that every person deserves respect regardless of their job or their bank account." He tucked the photograph carefully back into his pocket. "So I work as a janitor 3 nights a week. I bring Emma with me sometimes on weekends when the hotel is quiet. She helps me empty trash cans and mop floors. She's learning that there's nothing shameful about honest work." Victoria's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Tonight, she's home with her grandmother. She wanted to come to the gala. She loves fancy parties. But I told her it wasn't a place for kids. Sullivan's voice hardened, almost imperceptibly. Now I'm glad she didn't come, because I wouldn't have wanted her to see how some people treat workers, how they speak to people they consider beneath them, what they reveal about themselves when they think they have all the power. He looked directly at Victoria. "You asked me why I was here, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm here because my wife died of the disease this charity was created to fight. I'm here because I've given over $63 million to cancer research over the past 4 years. I'm here because my daughter's best friend is currently in treatment at the hospital this foundation supports." Victoria's legs gave out. She sat down heavily on the nearest chair. "I'm also here because I wanted to see who was running this foundation, who was deciding how the money was spent, who was representing the mission of helping sick children." Sullivan surveyed the crowd slowly, his gaze touching each face. "Now I know." Senator Whitmore found his voice. "Mr. Sullivan, James, surely you understand. We had no idea who you were. We thought—" "You thought I was a janitor?" "Yes." "And because I was a janitor, you thought it was acceptable to throw champagne in my face, to slap me, to mock me, to try to have me arrested, to fire a security guard who had done nothing wrong." Sullivan's voice remained calm, but something cold had crept into it. "You thought those things were acceptable because of what you believed my job was." The senator opened his mouth to respond, closed it, opened it again. That's not what you meant, not how you really feel." Sullivan shook his head slowly. "I think it's exactly how you really feel. I think tonight, for the first time in a long time, your family showed exactly who you are. Not to me. I could see it the moment I met you. But to them." He gestured at the crowd, at Claire's phone still recording, at the 500,000 strangers watching from around the world. Everyone saw. Victoria began to cry, tears streaming down her face, mascara running like a melting painting. Sullivan recognized the performance even as her voice broke. "Please." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mr. Sullivan. James, please, you have to understand." "I don't have to understand anything." Sullivan looked at his watch. A simple timepiece, nothing flashy. "The charity auction closes in 3 minutes. I was going to bid on the Monet lithograph. The proceeds were earmarked for a new pediatric wing." He straightened his wet tie again, smoothed down his stained jacket. But I don't think I will now. I think instead I'll withdraw my $35 million donation. I think I'll also withdraw the $15 million I gave anonymously 4 years ago, which under the Foundation's charter, I'm legally entitled to recover since it was designated for specific programs that were never implemented. The museum director made a strangled sound. Mr. Sullivan, please. The Foundation can't survive losing $50 million. We have commitments, staff, ongoing programs. Yes, you do. Sullivan's gaze moved to Victoria. Perhaps your board chair should have considered that before assaulting donors in the middle of your biggest fundraiser. He turned and began walking toward the exit. Behind him, chaos erupted. Victoria was screaming. Garrett was shouting at the museum director. Senator Whitmore was frantically making phone calls. Claire's live stream had hit 600,000 viewers and climbing. The comments a wall of shock and awe and the recognition that they just witnessed something that would be talked about for years. But Sullivan didn't look back. He walked through the crowd, which parted for him like water. Past the security station where Miles Crawford stood with wide eyes, recognition of what had just happened slowly dawning on his face. Past the coat check where a young woman had watched the entire confrontation unfold. Past the senator's aide who was desperately trying to get his attention. At the door, Sullivan paused. His phone had stopped buzzing, but now it rang. A different tone. He looked at the caller ID. White House Situation Room. Sullivan declined the call without hesitation. He stepped through the door into the cool night air and began walking down the museum steps. Behind him, through the closing door, he could hear Victoria's screams echoing through the grand ballroom. He didn't smile, but something in his posture shifted. Something settled. The night was young. And James Thomas Sullivan had plans for the Whitmore family. Big plans. But first he needed to go home. Needed to see his daughter. Needed to remember why he'd done this. Not for revenge, though that had been sweet. Not for justice, though that mattered. But for Emma. For the promise he'd made to Rachel. For the world he wanted his daughter to inherit. Sullivan walked 3 blocks before calling a car. Stood on the corner of Michigan Avenue watching traffic flow past, watching the city breathe and pulse and live. His phone buzzed one more time. He looked at the screen. Theo Barrett, his attorney, the only person who knew what Sullivan had planned tonight, who'd advised against it, who'd warned that using power as a weapon would make him no better than the people he despised. Sullivan answered, "It's done." Theo's voice was careful. "How do you feel?" Sullivan thought about that. About Victoria's face when she'd realized who he was. About Garrett's humiliation. About the senator's carefully constructed world crumbling in real time. About the 500,000 people who'd watched it happen. I feel like I just became exactly what Rachel warned me not to be. Silence on the line. Then, come to the office tomorrow. We need to talk about what happens next. Sullivan ended the call. The car arrived. A simple Uber. Not a town car, not a limousine. The driver didn't recognize him, which was exactly how Sullivan preferred it. They drove through Chicago's streets in silence, past neighborhoods where people worked 3 jobs to keep their kids fed, past buildings where janitors were cleaning offices right now, past the invisible architecture of a city that only showed one face to people like the Whitmores. Home was a townhouse in Lincoln Park, nice but not ostentatious, comfortable but not palatial. Sullivan had bought it after Rachel died because Emma needed stability, needed a place that felt safe. The lights were on in the living room. Grace, his mother, would be waiting up. But Sullivan didn't go inside immediately. He sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door, at the warm light spilling through the windows, at the life he'd built after losing everything that mattered. His phone buzzed one last time. A news alert. The video from Claire's live stream was already being shared across every major platform. 2 million views and climbing. #janitor billionaire trending #1 worldwide. The world was watching. The world was judging. The world was deciding what this moment meant. Sullivan pocketed his phone and walked to his front door. Inside, he could hear Emma's voice. She was supposed to be asleep, but she was talking to Grace about something. Her 9-year-old logic trying to make sense of whatever question had seized her attention tonight. He opened the door. Grace looked up from the couch, concern written across her face. Emma appeared in the hallway, wearing her favorite pajamas, the ones with stars that Rachel had bought her 3 Christmases ago. "Daddy, you're home late." Sullivan crouched down, let Emma run into his arms. "Sorry, sweetheart. Didn't mean to wake you. I wasn't asleep. I was thinking." "About what?" "About the fancy party. Did you have fun?" Sullivan felt something crack in his chest. He'd spent the last 2 hours wielding power like a sledgehammer, destroying carefully constructed lives, proving that he could hurt people who'd hurt him, and here was his daughter asking if he'd had fun. Some people were very mean tonight. Emma pulled back, studying his face with the intensity that only children possess, the ability to see past words to truth. "What did you do?" Sullivan hesitated. What could he say? That he'd humiliated them? That he'd used his wealth to crush people who'd looked down on him? That he'd felt righteous and powerful and completely justified right up until this moment? "I showed them they can't treat people that way." Emma's brow furrowed. "Did you use your power?" The question hit Sullivan like a physical blow. "What?" "Mommy used to say power is like a hammer. You can build or you can break." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, delivering wisdom she didn't fully understand but had absorbed from a mother who'd known something about the world that Sullivan was still learning. "Which did you do, Daddy?" Sullivan couldn't answer. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with truth that Sullivan wasn't ready to face. "You look angry, not happy. Winning isn't supposed to make you angry." Emma hugged him again, fierce and tight. Sullivan held his daughter and felt tears sting his eyes. Not for what the Whitmores had done to him, but for what he'd become in response. For the look on Victoria's face when her world crumbled. For the satisfaction he'd felt watching them suffer. For the fact that somewhere in the last 2 hours he'd crossed a line Rachel had warned him about. They deserved it, Emma. They were cruel. Did hurting them back fix the hurt? Sullivan had no answer. Emma took his hand, led him to the couch where Grace sat watching with knowing eyes. She'd raised Sullivan. She knew what he was capable of, what he was fighting, what he was becoming. Mommy said, "Forgiveness is hard. That's why it matters." Emma climbed into his lap, small and warm and impossibly wise. "I don't know if I can forgive them, baby." "You don't have to be perfect, Daddy. Just be kind." Grace reached over, squeezed Sullivan's shoulder. She'd heard the quote already, "Showing up matters more than showing off." Recognized it as Rachel's words, Rachel's wisdom, Rachel's ghost still teaching them both how to live. After Emma finally fell asleep, Sullivan carried her to bed, tucked her in with the stuffed rabbit she'd had since birth. He stood in her doorway for a long time, watching her breathe, watching innocence sleep, watching the person he'd promised Rachel he'd protect from becoming exactly what he'd become tonight. In his study, Sullivan pulled up the video. Watched himself on screen. Calm, calculated, wielding information like weapons. Saw the moment Victoria's face changed. Saw Garrett's humiliation. Saw the crowd's shock. Saw himself reflected in their eyes and didn't like what he saw. His phone rang. Theo again. Sullivan answered without speaking. "You need to see the news. You're everywhere. Good. Let them know what happens when they... James, listen to yourself." Sullivan hung up, stared at Rachel's photo on his desk. The official portrait from their wedding, before the cancer, before the loss, before he'd learned what it meant to have everything and lose it anyway. "I'm sorry." His whisper filled the empty room. "I'm so sorry." But he wasn't sure who he was apologizing to. Rachel, Emma, the Whitmores, or himself. He stood at the window watching dawn break over Chicago, over a city waking up to the news of what he'd done, over a world that would judge him as hero or villain depending on which version of the story they believed. Emma appeared in the doorway again, sleepy and small. "Daddy? Can't sleep? Too much on my mind. What are you going to do?" Sullivan looked at his daughter, at Rachel's eyes staring back at him from Emma's face, at the person who would judge him more harshly than anyone because she knew who he was supposed to be. "I don't know yet." Emma took his hand. Mommy would know. Yes, she would. They stood together as the sun rose, father and daughter, both trying to figure out what happened next, what justice meant, what kindness required, what promises to the dead demanded from the living. Sullivan didn't sleep. Dawn found him at Rachel's grave in Graceland Cemetery, kneeling on grass wet with October dew. The stone was simple. She'd insisted on that before the end. No ostentation, no marble angels, just her name and the words she'd chosen herself. She saw people. 2 years. 2 years of carrying her voice in his head, her wisdom, her warnings. 2 years of trying to be the man she'd believed he could become. And last night, he'd thrown it all away for the satisfaction of watching cruel people suffer. I saw them, Rachel. Saw exactly who they are. Wind moved through the oak trees overhead. A jogger passed on the path 50 yards away, earbuds in, oblivious. The city was waking up around him, millions of people starting their days, and somewhere among them were the Whitmores, Victoria crying in her mansion, Garrett nursing his humiliation, Claire watching her follower count plummet, the senator calculating damage control. But what did they see in me? The question Emma had asked, the question that had kept him awake all night. Sullivan stood, brushed grass from his knees. He'd come here looking for Rachel's blessing, her forgiveness, some sign that what he'd done was justified. Instead, he'd found only silence and the growing certainty that he'd become exactly what she'd warned against. His phone buzzed. Theo Barrett. Sullivan let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message as he walked back to his car. James, the video's at 4 million views. Every news outlet wants comment. The Whitmore's attorney called 6 times. And you need to decide what you're doing before this becomes something you can't control. Too late for that. The moment Victoria's hand had connected with his face, control had been an illusion. Now the world was watching, waiting to see what the janitor billionaire would do next. Sullivan drove home through Chicago's morning traffic, through neighborhoods where people were already at work, real work, the kind that left your hands rough and your back aching. He thought about the promise he'd made Rachel, about Emma's question, about the hammer that could build or break. Emma was at the kitchen table when he walked in, Grace making pancakes. His daughter looked up with eyes too knowing for 9 years old. "Did you figure it out, Daddy?" Figure what out? What you're going to do about those mean people? Sullivan sat down across from her, exhaustion pressing against his skull. What do you think I should do? Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. Mommy used to say people can change if you give them a chance, but they have to want to. And if they don't want to, then you tried. That's what matters. Grace set pancakes in front of them both, her silence more eloquent than words. She'd raised Sullivan to believe in justice, in standing up for yourself, in never letting bullies win. But she'd also taught him that revenge was a poison you drank yourself. Sullivan's phone rang again. Theo, this time he answered. I need you to set up a meeting. With the Whitmores, tomorrow, noon. Riverside Hotel, conference room B. Theo's pause spoke volumes. James, what are you planning? Giving them a choice. Change or destruction. But they have to decide. The next day, Sullivan arrived at the Riverside exactly at noon. The Whitmores had been there since 11:30. Desperate, terrified, uncertain. He'd made them wait on purpose, a small cruelty he wasn't proud of but couldn't quite resist. Conference room B was the same room he mopped every Thursday night. The irony wasn't lost on him as he pushed through the door wearing his janitor's uniform, the same one from the Gala, champagne stain faded but visible. He'd worn it deliberately, a reminder of what they'd seen when they'd looked at him. What they'd believed gave them permission to treat him as less than human. Victoria looked 10 years older. No makeup, hair pulled back, eyes red from crying. Garrett sat slumped in his chair, the arrogance burned out of him. Claire had left her phone in her purse, the first time Sullivan had seen her without it. Senator Whitmore's silver hair seemed grayer somehow. His distinguished bearing collapsed into ordinary old age. And Edward, the patriarch, 85 and failing, watched Sullivan with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. Sullivan sat down across from them. Let the silence build. 1 minute, 2. Only sound was Claire nervously tapping the table until Victoria's hand covered hers, stilling it. Edward spoke first. Mr. Sullivan, my family's behavior was unconscionable. Sullivan held up a hand. Edward stopped. The power dynamic was clear. Sullivan held every card, every advantage, every weapon. The question was what he'd do with them. I want you to answer one question honestly. Edward nodded. Would what happened that night have been acceptable if I really was just a janitor? The silence that followed was different, heavier, more honest. Victoria's tears started again, quiet and genuine. Garrett stared at his hands. Claire looked away. The senator studied the table. Only Edward held Sullivan's gaze. No. Victoria's voice was barely audible. It wouldn't have been. She looked up, mascara-free face naked with shame. But I've done it before, hundreds of times. To servers, drivers, cleaning staff, anyone I thought was beneath me. Her voice broke. You're just the first one who could destroy me back. Sullivan felt something shift in his chest. This was confession, not performance. This was truth breaking through decades of carefully constructed superiority. Why? Sullivan leaned forward. Why did you think it was acceptable? Victoria's hand shook on the table. I was raised to believe there were two kinds of people. People who mattered and people who didn't. My father taught me you could tell which was which by how much money they had. She looked at Garrett, at Claire, and I taught my children the same poison, made them into what I was, what I still am. Edward cleared his throat. Mr. Sullivan, we've prepared a proposal. I don't want your proposal. Sullivan stood, walked to the window overlooking the Chicago River. Boats moved past, tourists taking architecture tours, learning about the city's history while being blind to its present. I spent last night thinking about what my wife would want me to do. Rachel believed people could change, that everyone deserved a chance at redemption. He turned back to face them. I'm not sure I believe that, but I'm willing to test it. The room held its breath. Here are my terms. Sullivan walked back to the table, placed both hands flat on the surface, leaned in close enough to see fear in their eyes. Victoria. You will resign from every charity board immediately. You will write personal letters explaining exactly why, not some PR statement, the truth. Then you will spend 12 months volunteering at homeless shelters and soup kitchens, not writing checks, showing up, learning what service actually means. Victoria nodded, unable to speak. Garrett, you will surrender your executive title. 12 months working entry-level positions, warehouse, delivery, customer service, every job you've called beneath you, and you'll live on that salary. No family money, no trust fund. You'll learn what it means to earn something. Garrett's face went white, but he didn't protest. Claire, you will delete every piece of content from that night. Then you'll record a public apology. No PR team, no script, just you being honest. Your platform will spend the next year promoting marginalized businesses, using your influence for others instead of yourself. Claire wiped her eyes, nodded. Senator Whitmore, you will co-sponsor the Workplace Dignity Protection Act. You will return every dollar I've contributed to your campaigns. And you will support policies you actually believe in, not policies your donors want. The senator's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. Sullivan turned to Edward. And you will change your corporate culture. Not with programs or initiatives. You personally. Every interaction, every day, for the rest of your life. Edward met his gaze without flinching. Agreed. Sullivan stepped back. You can refuse. Walk away. I'll terminate every contract, destroy your company, make sure your name becomes synonymous with cruelty and corruption. He let that hang in the air. Or you can accept. But if you're just performing, going through the motions to save yourselves, Sullivan's voice went cold. I'll know, and then I'll destroy you anyway. So choose carefully. Edward looked at his family, then back at Sullivan. We accept your terms. The first week broke them. Garrett showed up at Whitmore Medical Supply's Southside warehouse at 6 a.m., wearing designer clothes and a Rolex that manager Patricia Hayes made him remove before he'd been there 30 seconds. She assigned him to Mitchell Price, 28 years old, 4 years with the company, no patience for entitled executives playing at labor. You'll call me Mitch. I'll call you Garrett. We're equals here. Garrett couldn't process it, the idea that he and this warehouse supervisor were equals, that money and name and family legacy counted for nothing in this concrete space filled with medical equipment and the smell of cardboard and sweat. By hour 2, Garrett's soft hands had blistered. By hour 4, they were bleeding. Loading boxes of IV equipment onto trucks, his grip slipped. $8,000 worth of medicine crashed to the concrete, glass shattering across the warehouse floor. Patricia appeared out of nowhere, fury incarnate. That box was medicine for a cancer patient. Some kid in Iowa who needs chemo isn't getting it because you were careless. She stepped closer, voice dropping to something more devastating than shouting. You just failed somebody's daughter. Garrett stood frozen among the broken glass, blood from his torn hands dripping onto the concrete. and all he could see was Emma Sullivan's photo, the little girl whose mother had died, whose father mopped floors to teach her that people mattered. The little girl he'd mocked without ever seeing her as real. In the warehouse bathroom during lunch break, hands shaking too badly to unwrap his sandwich, Garrett called his mother. "Mom, I can't do this." Victoria's voice came through the phone, raw and exhausted. "I can't rescue you. I'm learning I couldn't even rescue myself." She was at Southside Hope Shelter, on her knees in front of a toilet, scrubbing with hands that had never held a brush before last week. Director Barbara Jenkins had made it clear on day one. No cameras, no assistants, no special treatment, just work. Volunteer Frank, 65 years old and formerly homeless himself, watched her miss a spot under the rim for the third time. "Ma'am, you've got to really get in there." Victoria bent lower, fighting the gag reflex, seeing her reflection in the water. Aged, gray-rooted, unrecognizable. Somewhere in this person was the woman who'd slapped a stranger for being in the wrong place. But she couldn't find her anymore. Claire lost 2 million followers in the first week. Comments were brutal. Fake, rich girl playing redemption, disgusting hypocrite. Sponsorships evaporated. Income disappeared. She had to get a real job at a coffee shop downtown, minimum wage, anonymous for the first time in a decade. The manager didn't know who she was, didn't care. "You'll start on register." And Claire realized with creeping horror that without followers, without comments, without the constant validation of strangers, she had no idea who she was. But they didn't quit. None of them quit. Pride wouldn't allow it. The stubborn refusal to give Sullivan the satisfaction of their surrender. So they kept showing up, kept bleeding, kept breaking, kept learning what it meant to be powerless in a world built for people like they used to be. Week 12 arrived with Chicago's first snow. Garrett had calluses now, 15 pounds of muscle from lifting boxes. A vocabulary of warehouse slang he'd never imagined existed. Mitch had invited him to the crew's weekend softball game. "You in, Garrett?" Yeah, I'm in." His grandfather called that night. "Come back. VP role is waiting. You've proven your point." Garrett stood in his small apartment. 1 bedroom in Pilsen, $600 a month, nothing like the penthouse he'd left behind, and looked at the photo on his fridge. The warehouse crew at someone's birthday party, arms around each other's shoulders, genuine smiles. He was in the photo, actually in it, not just present, but included. People who liked him for himself, not his name. "No, grandfather, I'm not done. For the first time in 33 years, I'm earning something." Victoria faced her own test when Constance Harrington called with an offer. $60 million to buy out of her commitments, resume her real life, come back to society where she belonged. Victoria stood in the shelter kitchen, having just served lunch to 200 people. Mary, 73, and homeless since her house burned down, had thanked her by name, Vicky, not Victoria, not Mrs. Whitmore, just Vicky, like she was a person instead of a monument. "This is my real life, Constance. I just never knew it." But the peace they'd found was fragile. Month 4 brought the scandal they'd known was coming. Price Industries, Whitmore Medical's largest competitor, leaked 20 years of videos. Victoria screaming at maids, firing a driver for making eye contact, mocking a janitor's accent. A greatest hits compilation of casual cruelty that went viral in hours. 15 million views by morning. News coverage everywhere. Stock price crashed 28%. The foundation called an emergency meeting to discuss disavowing them. The senator's opponent made it the centerpiece of attack ads. The Whitmores gathered at Edward's estate, lawyers and PR consultants filling the study with strategic options. Fight back hard, discredit the sources, sue for defamation, character assassination. Edward raised his hand. Silence fell. Or we say nothing. Let our actions speak. Victoria looked at her father-in-law. The shelter residents know who I am now. Garrett straightened in his chair. The warehouse crew would vouch for me. Claire nodded. My new followers are smaller, but they care. Senator Whitmore's voice was quiet. I'd rather lose honestly than win dirty. The decision was made. No defense, no statements. Just continued work, continued showing up, continued becoming people they'd never been. But other people had plans. Mitchell Price organized a press conference on his own time, unpaid, off shift. 15 warehouse workers showed up because they wanted to, because something mattered more than convenience. Patricia Hayes stood at a makeshift podium in the warehouse break room, phone cameras recording. Garrett Sterling works harder than anyone now. 3 months ago, couldn't lift a box. Today he trains new hires, stays late, never complains. She looked directly into the cameras. That's not privilege. That's choice. And choice is everything. The video hit 1 million views in 3 hours. Hashtag earned redemption started trending. At the shelter, residents made their own video on borrowed phones. Barbara spoke first. Victoria comes every Tuesday, Thursday. For 4 months straight. Never missed once. Mary stepped forward, voice shaking but determined. She knows my name, my story. She sees me. Frank nodded. Last week she brought her own cleaning supplies. Said the shelter's budget shouldn't cover her learning. 5 million views. Comments shifted. Maybe she's real. Give her a chance. People can change. In his lifeguard AI office, Sullivan watched the videos on Theo's tablet, watched warehouse workers defending Garrett, watched Mary hugging Victoria, watched Claire's small business owners thanking her for using her platform to change their lives. Tears blurred his vision. They're doing it. They're actually changing. Theo set down the tablet. So what now? Sullivan wiped his eyes, thought about Emma's question, about Rachel's promise, about the choice between building and breaking. I attend next month's gala. Acknowledge them publicly. Show the world that redemption is real. He picked up his phone, scrolled to Victoria's number, hesitated. 4 months ago, he'd watched her slap him, watched her call him garbage, watched her reveal who she was when she thought she had all the power. Now he was about to give her something she'd never had before, a second chance she'd actually earned. The phone rang twice before she answered, voice exhausted. Mr. Sullivan? The second gala is in 3 weeks. I'll be accepting an award. I want you there. Silence, then quiet and genuine. Thank you. Thank you for believing we could change. Sullivan ended the call and stared out his office window at Chicago spreading below. The city of second chances, of rebuilding after fire, of becoming something new while remembering what you'd been. He thought about Rachel, about showing up mattering more than showing off, about seeing people instead of what you wanted them to be. And he understood finally that the hardest person to forgive was himself, for becoming the weapon, for enjoying their pain, for almost throwing away everything Rachel had taught him. But Emma had been right. You didn't have to be perfect. You just had to be kind. And kindness, Sullivan was learning, meant giving people the space to become who they should have been all along. 3 weeks later, Edward Whitmore collapsed in his study at 9 o'clock on a Thursday evening. The chest pain started while he was reviewing notes for the Gala speech he'd written, not the speech his PR team had drafted, but the one he needed to give. Words about accountability, about wasted decades, about learning humility at 85 because a janitor had cared enough to demand better. The ambulance arrived at Northwestern Memorial at 10:30. By 11, the diagnosis was clear. Significant cardiac event requiring immediate surgery. The operating room was scheduled for midnight. The Metropolitan Children's Cancer Foundation Gala started at 7 the following evening. Victoria sat in the surgical waiting room, still wearing the shelter volunteer shirt she'd put on that morning. Garrett arrived from his warehouse shift, steel-toed boots leaving dirt on the hospital's polished floor. Claire came from filming a documentary about a homeless veteran. Senator Whitmore rushed in from Springfield, abandoning committee hearings that suddenly seemed meaningless. The surgeon emerged at 11:45, scrub still crisp because surgery hadn't started yet. He'll be unconscious until morning, possibly longer. There's nothing you can do here. Go home, rest. Come back tomorrow. Victoria shook her head. I'm staying, but the gala, Claire started. Garrett interrupted. What would we have done? Before? The question hung in the sterile air. Before meant 5 months ago. Before Sullivan. Before transformation. Before they'd learned that choices revealed character more than words ever could. Claire answered first, voice small. We would have all gone to the gala. Appearances mattered more than anything. Or all stayed here, Senator Whitmore added. Grand gesture for the cameras. Victoria looked at each of them. Her children, her father, the family she'd shaped with toxicity disguised as standards. The old us would have done the same thing for optics. The new us. She trailed off, uncertain. They'd spent 5 months learning to be different people, but this was the first test without Sullivan watching, without consequences hanging over them like guillotines. We split up, Garrett said quietly. Each of us honors our individual commitments. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward into implications none of them had considered. Not a group decision for appearances. Not strategy. Just each person following their own conscience. I stay with Edward, Victoria said. All night, if necessary. I have overnight inventory shift, Garrett continued. I committed to Mitch and the crew. They're counting on me. Claire nodded slowly. I'm interviewing a homeless veteran named Marcus at 7 a.m. for the documentary. He's taken time off from his new job. He's taken time off work. I can't cancel. Senator Whitmore straightened in his chair. Floor vote on the workplace bill tomorrow afternoon. 4 months of building coalition, gathering support. I have to be there. The decision made itself. They weren't acting as the Whitmores anymore. Weren't moving as a unit designed to project power and control narrative. They were 4 separate people, each choosing what mattered, each willing to miss the gala where Sullivan would publicly acknowledge their redemption or condemn them as failures. Victoria pulled out her phone at 2 a.m. Edward still in surgery, her back aching from the waiting room chair. She dialed Sullivan's number before she could reconsider. He answered on the second ring, voice alert despite the hour. Mrs. Whitmore? Mr. Sullivan, She stopped, uncertain how to explain. My father-in-law had a heart attack tonight. Surgery. We can't make the gala tomorrow. Silence on the line. Victoria could hear him breathing, could imagine him calculating whether this was excuse or truth, performance or genuine crisis. Where are you now? Northwestern Memorial, surgical waiting room. And the others? Gone. Each honoring other commitments they'd made. More silence. Then Sullivan's voice, softer than she'd ever heard it. You made the right choice. Victoria started crying, quiet tears that had nothing to do with manipulation or strategy. Thank you. Thank you for understanding. I'll represent all of us tomorrow night. Focus on Edward. Tell him... Sullivan paused. Tell him I'm proud of how far you've come. The gala arrived with December snow turning Chicago white. Sullivan stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting the same Target tie he'd worn 5 months ago. The stain was gone now, professionally cleaned, but he could still see where champagne had soaked through. Emma appeared in the doorway, wearing the blue dress Rachel had chosen 2 years ago, before cancer had stolen her ability to imagine her daughter's future. You look handsome, Daddy. You think so? Mommy would say, you look like someone who learned something important. Sullivan crouched to Emma's level. What did I learn? That hurting people back doesn't fix anything. That giving people chances matters more than being right. Emma hugged him, fierce and certain. I'm proud of you. The Chicago Arts Institute ballroom looked identical to 5 months ago. Same crystal chandeliers, same marble floors, same 300 guests and designer labels. But the whispers that followed Sullivan's arrival were different. Not mockery now, but uncertainty. Respect mixed with fear. Recognition that the man in the Target suit held more power than anyone in the room, and they'd all watched what he could do with it. The museum director approached, nervous energy radiating from every gesture. Mr. Sullivan, the Whitmore's absence. They're exactly where they should be, Sullivan said, honoring commitments that matter more than appearances. Relief flooded the director's face. Your table is ready. But Sullivan wasn't finished. I'd like to make some additions to my table. Of course, anything you... The director's voice died as Sullivan gestured toward the entrance. 15 people in work clothes stood uncertain at the threshold. Warehouse workers who'd pooled $666 each to buy a table together. Mitchell Price at the front, hands still bearing the calluses that came from real labor. They're with me, Sullivan said. Behind them came another group. Shelter residents led by Barbara Jenkins, wearing donated formal clothes. Uncomfortable, but determined. Mary stood next to Victoria's usual volunteer partner, both women carrying themselves with dignity earned through survival rather than inheritance. And Miles Crawford, reinstated as head of security, arrived with his 3 kids, college students who'd almost had to drop out when their father lost his job, who'd been saved by Sullivan's intervention and never forgotten it. Sullivan directed them all to the VIP tables, watching old money society members shift in their seats, scandalized that manual laborers were sitting among them. He didn't care. These people had earned their places here more than anyone born into wealth. Emma found Garrett's daughter Lily near the dessert table, both girls recognizing each other from photos their fathers had shown them. Lily's grandmother had brought her because Garrett was at the warehouse, because showing up for your shift mattered more than galas. My daddy works in a warehouse now, Lily announced with pride that would have been impossible 5 months ago. My daddy's a janitor and a businessman, Emma replied. He says all work matters when you do it right. The girls disappeared toward the chocolate fountain, laughing about something only 9-year-olds understood, and Sullivan felt something ease in his chest. Next generation already learning the lesson without needing to be broken first. The award ceremony began at 8:30. The museum director gave his speech about philanthropy and community impact, about Sullivan's $94 million donated to children's cancer research over 5 years. The standing ovation started before Sullivan even reached the stage. He stood at the podium, Emma beaming from the front row, and looked out at 300 faces waiting to hear what the janitor billionaire would say. "Thank you," his voice carried across the silent ballroom. "A year ago, I stood in this room and learned something about myself I didn't like." The audience shifted, uncertain where this was going. I learned that when you give a wronged man power, he can become exactly what he hates. That night, I used my wealth as a weapon. I humiliated people who'd humiliated me, and I felt justified. Sullivan gripped the podium, but my daughter asked me a question that changed everything. She asked, "Did hurting them back fix the hurt?" He looked at Emma. The answer was no. Revenge doesn't heal wounds. It just creates new ones. So I gave the Whitmore family a choice: transform or be destroyed. And I expected them to fail. Expected performance, expected PR stunts, expected everything except what actually happened. Sullivan gestured toward the warehouse workers. Victoria Whitmore scrubs toilets at Southside Hope Shelter every Tuesday and Thursday for 5 months. Never missed once, even when her father-in-law had a heart attack last night and she could have used it as excuse. The shelter residents stood, applauding. Mary wiping tears from weathered cheeks. Garrett Whitmore loads trucks in a warehouse. His hands are calloused. His back hurts. And tonight, he's doing overnight inventory instead of being here, because he made a commitment to his crew. Mitchell and the warehouse workers rose, applause building. Claire Whitmore lost 2 million followers using her platform to help marginalized businesses instead of herself. She's filming a documentary about people society ignores. She's doing it for free. Senator Whitmore co-sponsored the Workplace Dignity Protection Act, lost his corporate donors, and will probably lose his re-election. But the bill passed last week. Thousands of workers will have protections they didn't have before. Sullivan's voice grew stronger. They proved me wrong. Proved that redemption isn't about going back to who you were. It's about becoming who you should have been all along. He lifted the Crystal Award, light refracting through it in patterns that painted the walls. My wife Rachel taught me something I almost forgot. She said showing up matters more than showing off. That every person deserves dignity. That seeing people, really seeing them, is the most important work we ever do. The Whitmores are showing up now. Not for cameras or reputation or because I'm forcing them, but because they finally understand what my wife knew all along. Sullivan's voice dropped to something rawer, more honest. I accept this award on behalf of everyone who's been overlooked. Everyone dismissed because of their job or their clothes or their circumstances. And I share it with a family who had everything, lost everything, and found what actually matters. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Warehouse workers crying openly. Shelter residents holding hands. Even society members moved by truth, spoken without polish or pretense. As Sullivan left the stage, the screens lit up with unexpected footage. Live feed from Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Victoria at Edward's bedside, reading aloud from a worn children's book. She didn't know cameras were recording, didn't know the Gala could see her. Just a woman caring for family, holding vigil, choosing presence over appearances. The ballroom watched in silence as Victoria finished the page, set down the book, took Edward's hand. No performance, no strategy, just love expressed through showing up. Someone in the crowd whispered what everyone was thinking. That's real. That's who she's become. Sullivan found Emma after the ceremony, scooped her into his arms. You were right, baby. People can change if you give them the chance. Did you forgive them, Daddy? Sullivan thought about that. About Victoria's transformation, about Garrett's calloused hands, about Claire's smaller but genuine following, about the senator's lost election and found integrity. I think so. Yeah, I think I did. But more importantly, I forgave myself for almost becoming the thing I hated. 6 months passed like water over stones, wearing away old patterns, revealing new shapes underneath. Spring arrived with its insistent green, with Chicago shaking off winter, with the Whitmore family continuing transformations nobody had predicted. Garrett was promoted to operations director, earned through merit, not inheritance. He still worked warehouse shifts on Saturdays because the crew had become family in ways the Whitmore name never had. Mitchell was his best friend now, best man at Garrett's second wedding, godfather to the daughter born that April. Victoria ran a job training program at the shelter, had placed 83 homeless people in permanent positions, had learned more about resilience from Mary than from 61 years of privilege. Constance Harrington had joined her, beginning her own redemption, learning that society's approval meant nothing compared to seeing people. Claire's documentary about unsung heroes won a regional Emmy. Her platform reached 500,000 followers who actually engaged instead of just scrolling past. She'd married the coffee shop manager who'd never known who she was, who'd fallen in love with who she'd become. Senator Whitmore lost his re-election by 4 points. Felt no regret. His nonprofit placed 200 formerly incarcerated people in jobs, gave them second chances the system had denied. He testified before Congress about the workplace bill he'd co-sponsored, watched it get signed into law, understood finally that legacy wasn't about elections won, but lives changed. Edward recovered slowly, restructured Whitmore Medical to include profit sharing for all 9,000 employees, created a $200 million scholarship fund in Rachel Sullivan's